It is wild how quickly I lose the touch. Right? Got the blue screen, and we swap over. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Food. I'm your co-host Mango,
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
and today we're going to talk a little bit about sandwiches. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we talk about food. And yes, I know it has been over 300 episodes, right? We have done multiple insanely long episodes on incredibly esoteric food, right? And we have yet to actually cover probably the most basic food that like we could think of in existence, right? Like sandwiches. But we've finally acquiesced before our legions of fans. Today's episode is going to be sandwiches. So I don't know. I guess we gotta get started.
All right, I'm going to start us off with a sandwich hot take, which
Okay.
is so recently I was in New Orleans doing research for the show, of course, and I something that I have had previously there and something I had this time was a sandwich known as a po' boy, and
Okay.
my hot take is I think po' boys are vastly overrated. They're basically like
Well,
a worse sub sandwich. And I think part of it is that like I think I always expected them to have more identity than they do. But like I've had some good po' boys. Like I recommend. I think it's called Killer Po' Boys. It's in the French Quarter. But it's just kind of like a sandwich, right? Like there's nothing about the ingredients that makes it particularly a po' boy except being on this like soft roll, which reminds me of like a uni mini roll. Of all things, right? And like that seems to be the
mm,
unifying factor. And I don't think the roll's particularly good, right? Like I think it's worse than your standard hoagie roll. The only thing I will say is that the kind of unique ones that show up a lot in New Orleans are the it's like a shrimp po' boy, like a fried shrimp po' boy, and there's like this roast beef po' boy that's they call it surf debris style, which is like I guess it's cooked so long that it kind of falls apart and they slop it on a sandwich. And that's tasty, but I also think it's like a little like in general the debris sandwiches I've had have been a little bit over salty and maybe even a little bit over umami, and it's like very much lacking what I would like a vinegar element, right? Like whereas on like a standard Italian hoagie, you get like the oil and vinegar, and that vinegar gives you a little bit of that acidic bite, or like maybe the tomato, right? Just to like just a little bit of an offset for the richness from the roasted sandwich. The debris
mm.
style po' boy doesn't generally have that. And I
I
think
also think sometimes you get it with mustard, right? Because a lot of times you get these kind of like these spicy mustards in there that also have that kind of add that like bite to it. I think specifically about the way that certain grilled chicken po' boys will have that really spicy mustard in there to uh to make it to like make it happen. Does that make sense?
yes, yes it does. But like I said, my biggest complaint is that I think the bread's bad. And I think the bread's one of the most important parts of a sandwich, right? Like if I'm gonna have like that long style sandwich, I want like something with a little bit more bite to it. I like mine on like the Italian style, right? Like a little bit harder,
Hmm.
maybe even a little crusty. But like and like I'll take the soft thing when I can get it, but it's like not a thing. It's like one of those things that like check off on your list of things to eat in New Orleans.
Yeah,
And
I gotta say that's really interesting. To me, the thing that makes a po' boy is entirely the ingredients, right? Like it is entirely about putting, like for instance, a shrimp po' boy being the iconic. Let's say that's the archetypal po' boy, right? It is that it is shrimp, right? It is less that it is that there is bread. So I think I kind of agree with you that I think the bread sucks, but to me that's a secondary quality, right? The real thing that I want when I'm ordering a po' boy is I want an interesting off the beaten trail sort of core, whatever the thing is going to be. A lot of the time it's shrimp, sometimes it's the ones that I always like are you get like chicken tenders, right? Or fried chicken in there. Just because that is a very cool thing, but it is not incredibly common in any other version of this kind of a sandwich. So even though I sort of think I agree with the underlying principle, to me it doesn't matter nearly as much because it's so secondary to what I think of as the core attraction of getting a po' boy. Does it make sense?
interesting. I got a question because in the back half of some of our episodes, you've talked about your love for our alma mater, the Charles Street Market used to serve the sandwich
Yeah.
called the Chicken Bacon Ranch. Um,
No, the Southwest Chicken.
Southwest
Yes,
Chicken.
I have. I mean, longtime listeners will know that my quest to find a substitute for the Southwest chicken sandwich, I spent years obsessing over this because I just could never find a version of it in Los Angeles that ever worked out for me. And obviously, I want to say it was maybe episode 228, so 2 years ago, I finally did find a version of the Southwest chicken sandwich at another sandwich shop that is to my liking. Yes, so that is the context for everyone who is just tuning in for the first time in a while.
But so question there, would you have called that sandwich a po' boy?
So the funny thing is, I probably would not have at the time, but I think that was a matter of kind of context, and I would say the Charles Street Market, and oddly enough, the place that I get it now, which is a small, like a mid-level sort of chain. I think it's only in California, but it might go out before, there is like, it's called Ike's Sandwiches. They're all over LA, and I think they're also in the Bay Area, but I don't think that they're outside of California. Both of those spots, I would call it absolutely just a sandwich. It's not a po' boy, right? But any other time I have ever gotten close to the Southwest chicken, it has been specifically at a restaurant that advertises po' boys, right? So for instance, there actually was one about a mile from my house called Orleans in York, which was a kind of combination of New Orleans style po' boys and New York style subs. And when I got the chicken tender po' boy at Orleans in York, that was pretty close. And I think for most of my attempts to find the Southwest chicken, even though they did not quite get there, I was using po' boys as the substitute. Even though, funnily enough, both times that I said I have achieved the dream of the Southwest chicken, it was not on a menu for po' boys. It was on a menu for submarine sandwiches.
Okay, so that's interesting, and I take your point. The only pushback I'd give you is I don't think those things are particularly unique to po' boys. I want to give you an example. Like I said, this place Killer Po' Boys. I'm gonna give it a shout out. It's what is it? It is 219 Dauphine in the French Quarter.
Okay.
The po' boy I had there, it's called the chorizo. It's homemade chorizo with chili lime aioli, pumpkin seed hummus, pickled red cabbage, fresh jalapenos, and queso duro, which was a great sandwich. But there's no reason there's nothing that made that sandwich particularly po' boy to me besides the roll it was served on. That was the only commonality I could find.
Yeah, that's fair. Because you could find that. Honestly, that's a sandwich that I feel like I could find in a deli in New York, word for word, right? Completely fine. So I do think that that's fair. It makes me think about bagels, right? So for instance, we would call a breakfast sandwich, right? Like there is a genre of food that is breakfast sandwiches, right? But they are almost always consistent for their contents. It's almost always some version of, ham, bacon, and then like egg and cheese, right? Like a bacon, egg and cheese, a ham, egg and cheese, right? I would say a Taylor ham, egg and cheese, obviously. Yeah, we've done an episode on Taylor ham and cheese, or Taylor ham. The Taylor ham, egg and cheese would be my preferred version, right? But these are essentially 3 or 4 variations on a very straightforward concept, right? It is eggs, it is cheese, it is some form of deli meat, essentially, right?
Meat, yeah.
That is the core contents. But eating a Taylor ham, egg and cheese on a bagel versus eating it on a roll versus eating it on an English muffin versus eating it on a croissant, right? Like all of those would be very, very different because of the sandwich. So I do think that there is something to the assertion that it is bread related. Maybe it's sort of both in some kind of singularity, if that makes sense. Almost like a Venn diagram, right? Which is that you either have a po' boy shop or a submarine sandwich shop, let's say, right? And there are certain tendencies towards different like meats as a part of that. For instance, I can't really think of too many po' boys that I would have had that would have like Genoa salami kinds of meats there, right? There's not a lot of that kind of deli meat, right? In the same way that I don't think that there are all that many sandwich shops that are like submarine sandwich shops that are going to offer me shrimp or chicken tenders or whatever as a core content.
I will say the exception there is that chicken parm. Chicken parm is very popular.
That's true. Yeah, I guess that's true. That is sort of what a chicken parm is. But shrimp is really the core
Yeah.
one, right? Like that's
Shrimp
why I think that is the archetypal po' boy.
And the debris, like the roast beef debris. That's like that is very specific NOLA thing, right? So yes, I will agree with you.
Yeah, I have never seen debris anywhere else, even though I've gone to a million of these different po' boy places all over Southern California, right? Which is interesting. But so and then I think that there's this sort of Venn diagram of shared stuff in the middle. Mostly, it's like sausages, right? Because a lot of po' boys are featuring sausages, it feels like. And then there's a lot of, especially hot Italian subs, right, are going to have sausages of different varieties in there, kind of as like the core meat. And I feel like those are the shared elements between the two of them. And so sometimes a po' boy is differentiated by its content of like shrimp, right?
Right.
Barbecue shrimp, fried shrimp, whatever. Sometimes a po' boy is differentiated by its breading or by its bread, and that is determined by its place inside of this Venn diagram that I'm sort of setting up. Does that make sense? Is that maybe the taxonomy?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we agree that, like a po' boy is a certain kind of sandwich, but I feel like a lot of these conversations about sandwiches tend to go bigger than that, right? Like it is always a question of, is such and such a sandwich because it fulfills some kind of strange definition, right, of what it means to be a sandwich, right? Is a hot dog a sandwich? Is like a classic one. Is a taco a sandwich, for instance?
Yeah, is a what's it like, and then you get like absurd versions, like is a, I don't know, like a GameCube a sandwich, right? Because the disc is in between the top and the bottom, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like there is a narrow definition of sandwich that defines bread, and then there is a wider definition of sandwich that sort of defines shape, if that makes sense.
So let's get in. So like, it's interesting because like I think that like hot dogs have this kind of weird status because they are kind of like a separate, like I think on kind of like objective, brain empty kind of like approaching the world from a naive view, hot dog doesn't seem too objectionable as a sandwich, right? Like, but to me, it kind of like it's got this kind of its own unique identity that wants to be separate from sandwich, right? But I think it would be less controversial, like form wise, than something like say a wrap, or like especially like a a tortilla wrap versus like a lettuce wrap. Do you have opinions on whether those are sandwiches or not?
Yeah, I think that's where things get complicated. Right?
As Arahe says in the chat, is a quesadilla a sandwich?
Yeah, because what happens when you say a wrap is a sandwich, right? When you agree that a wrap is a sandwich, people immediately jump to quesadilla and burrito. They go, is a burrito a sandwich? And the default answer for most people would be no, of course not. A burrito isn't a sandwich, right? But if you forgive the wrap, you kind of invite the comparison to quesadilla and burrito, right? And the lettuce wrap makes it entirely right up in the air. So for instance, a version of this argument that I've seen is a hamburger is a sandwich. Okay. A lettuce wrap hamburger is also a valid hamburger. Therefore, a lettuce wrap sandwich is also a valid sandwich, right? A lettuce wrap hamburger is where you have two things of lettuce rather than buns, right? It's very common. You get it. I mean, even at like Carl's Jr., if you go to Carl's Jr. and say, "Hey, I'd like to get lettuce wrap for my whatever it is, right? My Angus beef 6-pounder or whatever," they will make that for you, right? And so it's this kind of process of like the transitive property of certain ingredients. Well, if we agree that a hamburger is a subsection of sandwich and this version of a hamburger exists, does that version of a hamburger kick back up to the definition of sandwich and go, you can have a sandwich that doesn't include any bread whatsoever?
Yeah, no, that's that's I think a good point. Yeah, no, this is like the kind of taxonomy of language stuff. That's actually pretty interesting. In the chat, Arahe points out or says, if I told you, do you want a sandwich and I handed you a hot dog, how would you feel? This is super interesting because I've heard this exact same comparison made, but as like an explainer about like how the law works, right? Like if you tell someone to go out and get you a sandwich and they come back with a wrap, you're probably going to be like, you maybe fit there. But if they come back with salad, they're going to be like, fuck you, right? Like you didn't do what I said, right? But that's like that's an right. Like I think
Yeah, I
that's
mean, it's funny because, obviously on the
it's a very
podcast, I've talked
qualitative
about this
thing.
before. I don't play a lot of video games. I don't really like video games. I'm not really interested in them. But something that I've heard through various kinds of platforms is this idea of different kind of categorizations of like video games. Like I guess there are games of certain genres that are defined by different qualities, right? Like camera and like I don't know. I'm not an expert in this kind of thing, and I feel like it's approaching something similar, right? Which is to say that maybe it is less about the meeting certain individual criteria, which is sort of what the following down that rabbit hole of lettuce wrap sandwiches kind of goes through, right? It is assigning certain criteria and then matching things to sort of meet it, and instead kind of creating a holistic kind of like viewpoint on the thing. For instance, you might be able to say that there are certain hamburgers that are not sandwiches because they change the fundamental function of the hamburger such that it is no longer a sandwich, right? Which would preserve your ability to say, okay, a Big Mac is a sandwich. A lettuce wrapped Carl's Jr. whatever is not. And I think maybe that there's something in there to how we approach that sort of definition.
Right. No, and so that's basically the supposition that hamburgers are not strictly a subset of sandwiches, right? Like that's like the set theory way to express it.
Yeah.
Although I do think there's a lot of people who would tell you that a lettuce wrapped hamburger no longer counts as a hamburger. I think, for instance, George Motes, the burger scholar on on YouTube, would say that it doesn't count. Not that it's like an invalid thing to eat, just like he wouldn't count it as a hamburger. Kind of like he wouldn't count like a sloppy Joe as a hamburger, even though it is like, you know, by by ingredients, a sloppy Joe is like ground beef. It's just like arranged in a different format, right? Like,
Yeah, definitely.
Same thing with like a taco, right? Like a taco is pretty analogous to a burger, right? If you really think about it. But
Yeah, I mean, the other interesting avenue I've seen people take when we have this conversation is about open face sandwiches, right? For instance, if I have an open face sandwich, right, I am kind of getting rid of the top and bottom qualifier, right? You don't really need a top or a bottom. And funnily enough, when I lived in
go on, sorry.
Well, when I lived in Japan, they used to call these hamburgers, which was a very weird thing. But I guess it was just like the thing in Japanese was if you had two buns on like on top of a ground beef patty, that was a hamburger, right? But if you took that top bun off, it became a hamburg, and it was essentially the same thing, but it's just an open face version of that, sandwich. But as soon as you get rid of that top and bottom criteria, it opens the floodgates, right? Is a pizza a sandwich because it has, a carb on the bottom, right? Like those are the same sorts of questions.
See, the thing that I would say there is that an open face sandwich is specifically kind of like, I feel like you have to have like two halves, right? Like if you're opening a sandwich up and eating it with a fork and a knife, right? So like theoretically it could have a top and a bottom if you chose to reassemble it, right? Like that hamburger thing you're describing sounds like it's not doing that.
Yeah, technically speaking, I guess the hamburg was not doing that. You didn't even get essentially the top bun in this in this analogy. But yeah, I think
hold on. I got to address this real quick. In the chat, Illuria says a pizza is an open face sandwich. Don't at me, Italy. And I have to tell you, if you go back and listen to some of my previous rants, pizza is it's primarily an Italian American invention. There's this thing called the pizza effect, which is actually super fascinating, right? Like pizza really grew as an Italian American food, but like Americans' desire to have like authentic pizza, which didn't really exist, like caused people in Italy to open up rustic pizzerias that weren't there before and like cater to American tourists post-war, right? Like it's a whole thing. Like America like reintroduced pizza to Italy. It's a whole thing, but but that's just sorry. That's a tangent. You were going to say. I'm sorry.
I honestly don't remember what I was going to say because obviously, I mean, listen, I don't think I have to explain how emotional a topic pizza is for us.
For this
You know, I like it certainly brings out the best in us, as evidenced by our, you know, our previous kind of record-shattering episode that went minorly viral. I mean, Gordon Ramsay listened to our episode on pizza from a year ago, which was obviously an experience. But part of that conversation, right, is a similar kind of taxonomical thing. We spent a lot of time talking about the difference between Chicago pizza and New York pizza as a sort of like the what is tomato casserole, right?
Right.
Which I think was Jon Stewart made that comparison where he said, essentially, Chicago pizza is tomato casserole. It is not pizza. It has a couple of the same ingredients, but functionally speaking, it is completely different. Which I think is echoed here by the way that we're talking about some of them. You know, some of these kinds of foods.
Right.
And I kind of wonder a little bit, even the hamburger thing, I kind of hesitate to call a hamburger a sandwich, even though that one tends to float through, right, in any of these conversations, right? One of the first hurdles you get over is you say, okay, is a hamburger a sandwich? Most people kind of agree to that, right? The reason that I hesitate is because there is that feeling of, if I told you I want a sandwich and you brought me a hamburger, that would be weird, right? That would feel weird. Which is, you know, I think it's kind of what underlines this this whole sort of discussion.
Would you feel weird if somebody handed you a chopped cheese? That, you know, that New York style kind of like, it's like 2 hamburger patties chopped up on a sub roll, right? Like, that's basically a double hamburger. Like
yeah, and the one that really fucks me up is a meatball sub. Right? I could go to any sub shop in the world and get a meatball sub, but really that's functionally a hamburger, right? Like, I mean, it is down to the fact that it is ground beef, right? It is just a ground beef arranged in a sphere instead of arranged in a flat cylinder, right?
This is also the Sloppy Joe thing, right? Like, Sloppy Joe is also that, right? But Sloppy Joe is also
I mean, and the funny thing is that when you said he doesn't, that to me seems too narrow a definition of a hamburger. I want to call a Sloppy Joe a hamburger.
See, I don't think I'd ever call a Sloppy Joe. I think like hamburger is a narrow enough category that like you have to have like a ground beef patty. Like, if you took a ground beef patty and put Sloppy Joe on top of it, right? I would call that a Sloppy Joe hamburger, right? Like, but I wouldn't call it without I feel like it needs the patty to be a hamburger.
Yeah, and the question becomes also like what kind of patty counts, because for instance we would call a bison burger, right? I have had a kangaroo burger. I mean, you know, obviously we're both foodies. We have been hosting this podcast for forever. I'm sure that we have eaten a gazillion exotic animals, kangaroo,
I've had the Impossible
alligator.
Whopper.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly, right? Like all that stuff qualifies as hamburger, but we would not call a traditional like chicken patty sandwich a hamburger. You would not call a Chick-fil-A #1. You wouldn't call that a hamburger, right? You'd call it a chicken sandwich.
I was gonna say, like, even like, I don't know, I'm not sure if McDonald's does this with their like chicken sandwiches, but like if you took like the chicken goop and pressed it into a patty and fried it, I'd call that a chicken sandwich. I wouldn't call that that is
burger. Exactly what I mean, right? Like that is how those chicken sandwiches are made. Those, especially the crispy chicken, right? A grilled chicken breast, you can make a sandwich out of that, which is a different I'm
sorry. The idea of a Sloppy Joe hamburger is the most onion shit I've ever heard.
I just love the chat on these episodes because it just like goes absolutely bananas. Yeah, it was because you started laughing and I was like, what could he possibly be laughing at? And then I look at the chat and I see that the idea of a Sloppy Joe hamburger is the most unhinged shit I've ever heard. And the truth is, I have eaten it, right? Like I have absolutely eaten shit that is just like that. Right? Which is, a meat on meat, right? A bacon burger, right? Which is maybe the default burger that I would order at any mom and pop burger shop anywhere in Southern California. That is a pretty similar construction to a Sloppy Joe hamburger. I'm Chili Burger. Across the street, there is a giant sign for Jim's Burgers. Shout out to Jim's Burgers. They sponsored some of our early episodes, but then declined to return. They have a huge chili burger, right? Which is essentially a Sloppy Joe hamburger, right?
No, you're right. It's with different like seasoning for the chili, essentially. You're right.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, back a little bit to maybe some of this core stuff. Do you have deep opinions on lobster roll? This is like a big New England thing, and I know that
Yeah,
you
so it's interesting. I've had lobster roll, and lobster roll strikes me as a sandwich immediately, right?
so
Somebody were to by both definitions, by a technical definition and we can call this the Arahe conjecture because she pitched it in the chat, right? If I told you you want a sandwich and you brought back a lobster roll, fair enough, right? That's perfectly reasonable to me.
So I want to dig a little deeper. I don't want to necessarily rehash this whole argument about it because I think I mostly agree with you. I think I might look a little bit weird at you, but also I think there's also the mitigating factor. If I told you to get me a sandwich, you got me a lobster roll, and it's a real lobster roll. You've paid a lot of money to get me a lobster roll, right? So I'm also not gonna look a gift horse than us or whatever. But there's two primary styles of lobster roll. There's cold with mayonnaise and hot with butter. Do you have a strong opinion on which one is better?
The one that I prefer is cold with mayonnaise.
Really?
I don't think I've ever had hot with butter and I've liked it. Mostly kind of because, yeah, I don't know. It hits me in a weird place between actually eating a straight up lobster, right? Where that is obviously hot with butter. You boil a lobster, you pry it apart and you eat that with a lot of butter. And you also have like crab cakes, right? I like crab cakes quite a lot, and I think that those make for good sandwiches. And when I've had lobster roll that is hot with butter, it always just feels like a worse, less interesting. I almost sort of want to eat that like potato salad more than I want to eat it like lobster roll, if that makes sense. Whereas and ironically, a cold with mayonnaise is closer to potato salad, but that to me is more natural. But that might be part of where I grew up, though. In Central New Jersey, we've talked about this in our episode on Sloppy Joes. In Central New Jersey, a Sloppy Joe is a coleslaw sandwich, essentially, right?
Right.
What it is, it is two buns, it is a bunch of coleslaw on there, right? And that's it. That's the end of the sandwich, essentially. And it just reminds me a lot of that. And so I think that might be why I feel like a cold mayonnaise version of the lobster roll is the one that I default to.
Okay. See, I'm going to take the opposite position. I much prefer the hot with butter version. But I think part of it too is like getting decent lobster and getting like the best lobster roll I ever had was warm with butter and it had really good butter. Like that was definitely a part of it, right? I've been into it and like I know that like the brand of butter is Kate's of Maine, which is like a very local to like this area of the country brand of butter.
Sure.
And like I could it was just so good and it really elevated it. But I don't know. That's just down to a personal preference thing. I was just curious. Like there are people who will like go to war over this, right? Like like we go to war over pizza, but neither of us are quite New England natives, so I don't think either of us have.
Yeah, I think that's got to be it. It is a little outside of my sort of zone of influence. I have had I want to even say that the time I had like warm lobster rolls, it was just in like a. Because it feels like the default version is cold, right? Like it is less common to have warm in general.
So my sources tell me that mayonnaise is Maine style and butter is Connecticut style. I will say from living up here, I have seen the butter style more frequently.
Interesting.
And also like warm with butter doesn't always mean it's actually warm. It means like the butter's warm, right? Like it's drawn butter, right? Like it's liquid butter. It's not like they're spreading butter on the bun.
And I kind of wonder a little bit if that just part of me also wants to say that I have a natural kind of aversion to butter as a condiment on a sandwich. So for instance, in our episode on bagels, one of the things I talked about is for years, like my breakfast order was 2 garlic toasted with butter, right? And part of that is that the core flavor is butter in that instance, right? You have a little bit of the garlic there, and then you have, but mostly it is the butter, and you don't need a lot of butter, which is also one of my things. A little bit of butter goes a long way. It has a very core, savory flavor, and you don't need to lather it on there to get that. You just need a little bit. You just need a quick kind of a spritz, like a spritz of butter to get that core, butter flavor. But I can't think of too many sandwiches where I want butter involved in that process. I almost always want mayo, right, as like the condiment that is savory and oily in that. So maybe it has less to do with the warmth or any of the other sorts of things, and just kind of because like my default in these sorts of situations is to go towards mayo as kind of like the sandwich condiment. When I order a Taylor ham, egg, and cheese, I'm not really looking for butter in that, but I would be okay if there were mayo on the top and bottom of that bun.
It, interesting. I think I generally agree with you like about the general case here. Weirdly, I'm pretty sure the British put butter on like their ham sandwiches, and like instead of mayo. But that's like a British thing, and
That is wow. Okay, that's weird.
yeah.
But okay, that's fine, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't know. And it's fine because there's other stuff where I do want butter kind of like involved, but I feel like almost that's almost always a cooking thing. For instance, in our episode on quesadillas, the thing that I talk about is essentially cooking that quesadilla in a pan of butter adds a lot to it because butter has flavor, whereas whatever generic oil doesn't, right? And I think that flavor adds to the whole thing of that very simple cheese salsa quesadilla that I outlined in that episode. And a similar thing is maybe true in like a breakfast sandwich. Sometimes I think eggs cooked in butter are better tasting than eggs cooked in oil, right? Though actually I don't know if everybody knows this. My real preference is to cook the bacon and then cook the eggs in the bacon grease, fat, right? Yeah. But that's a like a specific kind of like side tangent. There's just very few sandwiches that I want to have butter, I feel like, and there are a lot of sandwiches where I go, oh yeah, mayo, like let's put that in there.
Yeah, no, I think I generally agree with you. I actually think that mayonnaise is the key hidden kind of fourth ingredient that makes a great BLT. It's like a little bit of mayonnaise on the sandwich. I think it's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I this is maybe another piece of thing. I don't like tomatoes. I have never liked raw tomatoes. There's just something about that kind of that kick of raw tomato in a sandwich always bothers me. But I almost always replace it with onion, which also has its own sort of kind of kick there, right? And I would say if we're talking subsections of sandwiches, the bacon, lettuce, onion that I make also lives and dies based on the mayo inside of that sandwich. So I think I agree with this this principle.
So I just want to comment there that I think something that is that like tomatoes are often bad, right? Like I think I would agree. I think I'd rather have like a bacon, lettuce, and onion over like a bacon, lettuce, and grocery store tomato. If I can get a good tomato, I love a good tomato. I love like a good tomato, a little bit of salt. I love a caprese salad made with like a good tomato. But it's
yeah, I also like caprese.
So
that's interesting. Part of the caprese, the thing that really makes a caprese work for me is the vinegar in there. And I don't have a lot of vinegar on my sandwiches, I feel like, which is maybe part of the thing.
This is interesting because in my mind, a pure caprese doesn't have vinegar. It's just olive oil, basil, fresh mozzarella, and tomato. And like I've had it with like balsamic on it, but I don't consider that a core part of it. But.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of upbringing, right? Whenever I had caprese as a kid, it always had balsamic vinegar, and that was the thing that really like made it good. Though also I do very much remember as a kid me and my sisters fighting over the fresh mozzarella because that is the thing that everybody really loves in what the magic of a caprese is probably the mozzarella, right?
Yeah, the fresh mozzarella. Although again, I think that can be elevated by a very good tomato, right? Like you get a good tomato in there, I think it makes it much better. And I think that also like
yeah, I'm also very happy for tomatoes that are modified. So for instance, pico, pico's fine. I'm happy to have pico. Pico de gallo. What else are they thinking? Pesto made with tomatoes, also perfect. I'm happy, more than happy.
What?
Sun-dried tomatoes, great. More than happy to have anything
pesto
along those
do you
lines.
have that's made with tomatoes? It's
sometimes you never had like a...
I've never had something that's called a pesto that's tomato. Like I've had tomato sauce, right? Like I've had tomato sauce with like greens in it. I don't think I've ever had like something that like what is pesto? It's like is it basil and pine nuts and oil, right, and garlic, right? Like that's like the traditional. I just don't think I've ever had one with tomato in it.
I maybe am. I have definitely had pesto. I agree with you that like the base version of pesto, but I feel like I've had pesto with tomato in it.
Like is it emulsified into like is it emulsified or is it like chunks of tomato in a relatively
No,
coarsely
it's not
done?
emulsified. It's like it's like chunks of. It's kind of
Okay,
like I guess it's kind of like combining pico and pesto, if that makes
and is
sense.
the pesto rougher then? 'Cause this almost sounds
Uh,
like
y-
spinach dip in a way. Like not that's what you're describing, but like it.
yeah, kind of. Yeah, but yeah. I mean, I also think pesto also goes with yeah, it's just yeah, okay. So I'm looking at a recipe right now. It is just pesto, but then you put some chopped tomatoes in there
Okay,
basically, right?
okay, that makes sense.
So that's not really I think I probably agree that that is just pesto, and then chopped tomatoes is a different
Ingredient,
piece of the
yeah.
different piece of the puzzle, but I tend to like that. Really what I'm objecting to is I almost always don't want to have, two tomato slices in a burger, or two tomato slices, or however many tomato slices on a sub. I always want to replace that tomato with onions. But part of that is maybe I just fucking love onions. Who knows,
No,
right?
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right, getting back to sandwich stuff. Do you have a particular favorite sandwich?
I've talked in the past about the way that I approach a lot of places, right? Is I almost always want to walk into I like want to walk into a shop and I want to get something that is very basic and default, because I feel like if anybody's going to knock me off my feet, right? It is going to happen in that core, what is the straightforward version of the thing. If I walk into a hamburger place, the basic hamburger is kind of gonna be the thing that they're making the most, the thing that they are theoretically kind of like the best at, right? And a lot of the times those end up being my favorites because I tend to prefer the simple, like I want simple flavors that are accentuated rather than the kind of kitchen sink version where you're trying to put as many flavors into a thing kind of as possible. But I think my favorite sandwich probably has to be the Southwest chicken, just because it's
Yes.
so legendary. It's like it defined years of my food eating life, where it gnawed at the back of my brain, and that is a very advanced non-basic sandwich, which is kind of interesting. That said, I think the sandwich I probably eat most often is like, either a ham and cheese, or like, I don't know, maybe you like, it could be broken down by type, right? Um, because I want to say a ham and cheese, an Italian sub, a Taylor ham, egg, and cheese, and like a bacon burger. All of those are different forms of sandwiches, and they're kind of the defaults. Those are my favorite versions of each of those subforms. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I'm going to say that like for what you were saying about like the basic thing, I agree with that like in some situations, but I feel like for sandwich shops, because sandwiches are kind of like I don't know. I feel like they're a medium that lends itself to a little bit more creativity. I like to go for the thing that the place wants to show off, right? Like one of my favorite sandwiches, like one of my favorite singular sandwiches, right? Like not like not a type of sandwich, but like and part of this is nostalgia. There's this place down the Jersey Shore called Kelly's, that serves an excellent Reuben, which over the years I will swear they have increased the amount of sauerkraut and decreased the amount of pastrami, right? Like, uh, but like that's tied up in like a specific memory to me, but that's like a thing that they do, right? Like that is a thing that they are famous for. And so I want to like, if they want to say to me, this is our best foot, I would like to be like, if you were going to say to me, this is the thing that we are known for, this is the thing that we are very good at, I will say like, okay, I will meet you on your terms, right?
Yeah,
um
that is definitely like a fair caveat. Most of the time, I feel like that sort of thing, that sort of thing happens at kind of like mid to high tier places, right? Where they will kind of have this like headlining item, and they'll maybe call it something cute, like, oh, this is the big mics or whatever, right? But I just feel like for a lot of, for any, if I'm walking into a default mom and pop shop that I've never been to before and they don't have anything kind of along those lines, I'm almost always going to be getting the kind of
The basic.
You know, what I would think of as like the basic experience, right? If I'm going to a sub shop I've never been to before and I see a bunch of stuff on their menu, the one that I'm going to gravitate to is that Italian sub because I feel like that is the I don't know, it's just like the essence of it, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah,
this is
I'm more than happy to carve out an exception for places that are famous for their blank.
this is interesting because recently I rediscovered one of my great loves, which is a Chaps pit beef sandwich. Pit beef being a very Baltimore thing where we went to college.
Hmm.
Um, and this is interesting because I find that like a lot of people that went to school with us didn't get outside the city much. Chaps is pretty famous, but it's like maybe half hour, 20 minutes, half hour outside of Baltimore. Um, uh, and it's interesting because like I think a lot of people at school didn't have a lot of mobility. And the reason I
Hmm.
visited these places is my parents would occasionally come down to visit and stay outside the city and then drive me out to these places. Right. Which I feel like a lot of people whose parents came to visit stayed very close to campus. And so that was like never like a
Yep,
thing.
that's 100% right.
Yeah.
I did not have a car until the the summer after my senior year where I was on campus working. Um and uh and when my parents came to the city, well, my parents they never drove really. They almost always took the train.
Right.
So we just didn't have cars all that often. We were using public transport for everything. So um yeah, I have not been to Chep. So I have had pit beef. Though interesting, I don't think of I don't think I've ever had a pit beef sandwich. I've only had it at like barbecue places, right?
Interesting.
Where yeah, you know, it is just like a piece of the kind of barbecue meal that is unrelated to sandwiches.
So this is actually super interesting to me because I have it. So the Pitts or Chaps is famous enough that it's got a couple locations now, right? The original is this kind of like dingy little shack that's basically in the parking lot of a strip club. Um, and but you can tell that most of the cars are there for the pit beef because like the pit beef's great, right? Like it's and
Sure.
they've got this pit and it is so good. Like believe me, like it is like one of the best sandwiches I've had in a long time, right? Like definitely this year so far. Um, but it's funny because like so my mom's a big fan. My mom did not go. So a couple weeks ago I was down for reunion and my mom's a big fan, but she didn't come with me for my reunion, obviously. So
Mhm.
on the way back, I stopped at there's one in Aberdeen, and it's funny because it was almost like a Five Guys inside, like very clean, very sterile, very much not shack in the parking lot of a strip club, right? Which also had like the Guy Fieri, right? You know, like Guy dined here type thing on it, right? Which is this is how my mom found it, right? It was on Diners, Drivers, and Dives. Um,
Mhm.
uh, but it still had the same quality, which is good, which is good for everyone, I guess. But it's just hilarious to me that like the place like went from like shack in a parking lot to like very very clean stainless steel like counter service type place.
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of thing that has famously ruined places,
Yeah.
right? There's a whole article series that I want to say was in like San Francisco Magazine or maybe it was the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper where a guy their food critic reviewed a bunch of different places and they found quote unquote the best burger in the Bay Area, right? It was this very out of the way small spot, not in the city, not super famous. Then there were a couple of follow-up articles about how the first article's fame drastically changed the makeup of that place because people are now going to this place not as, you know, their local burger shop, but as the place that the San Francisco Chronicle has said this is the best, you know, the best spot in the area, right? And it eventually closed because the fame created huge lines and huge waits and huge draws on the supply chain of this place, such that a bunch of people were left unsatisfied and very angry because you know it was a place that has like four tables, right, and is built to you know hit the lunch rush from a local, you know, whatever accounting firm sort of thing. But now all of a sudden it's drawing in all of this stuff, and then people left with these really dissatisfied, you know, opinion of it, and that also spread like wildfire, such that they kind of lost all their business. And I feel like that is a really interesting kind of phenomenon that kind of goes hand in hand with places like in your instance like Chaps Pit Beef, right? Like where a a place kind of blows up out of nowhere, and how the process of that happening actually materially changes what the thing served kind of in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting because like obviously Chops survived that. Are you familiar with Jimmy Buff's?
Jimmy Buff. I want to say yeah, but
It,
maybe I'm just thinking of Jimmy Buffett.
Jimmy Buff's is an Italian hot dog place in.
Oh yes, in West Orange, right? Yes, I am. I think I've eaten here actually.
So,
Yeah,
so
but yes, I am definitely familiar with Jimmy Buff's.
So the thing is like when we were in like high school or college, right? Jimmy Buff's expanded to like 4 or 5 locations, including it had a location inside the Rock in Newark, right? Like it was like one of the vendors at the Devils games.
Okay.
And there was a branch in Randolph. There was another one. I want to say there's anyway expanded to a couple, and then it eventually collapsed back down. And there's 2 of them again. There's the original location. I think there's one in Union City. Maybe somewhere else, or
I'm seeing Scotch Plains and West Orange. The one that I remember was from West Orange. Right?
West Orange,
obviously,
it's the greasy little one, right? Like that's
got to be the original, right?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
That is absolutely the original. There was oh man, there was one that I used to go to that was down 46 or no down 10, all the way. You know what? I'm not gonna do the geography of
God, holy shit, Route 10 bringing me back with that shit. Yeah,
right. Yeah, so like that, but that similar thing, right? Like very fit. Like it is the Italian hot dog place, right? One of my favorite places. Blew up and then contracted, but it survived it, right? Just
yeah,
drank back.
And then there were places that blew up, and like the Primanti brothers, right? The Primanti brothers are all over the place. This is a traditionally Pittsburgh location, but Primanti brothers now has locations. Yeah, I'm looking. Fort Lauderdale, right? There's one in Indianapolis, right? Holy shit, are there 2? No. Okay, thank God. I was about to say, if there are Primanti brothers in California, I'm going to flip the fuck out. Primanti brothers is a famous spot, and it fits into our conversation. Primanti brothers is a Pittsburgh sandwich shop. Thing that they did was they take the coleslaw, they take the fries that you would normally get with a sandwich of that variety, they put it on the sandwich, right? So your sandwich has French fries on it, right? It has coleslaw on it, and look, and that's the part that I always liked was the coleslaw, because it reminds me of the sloppy joes that I used to eat when I was like biking around, whatever, Springfield, New Jersey kind of thing. And that is a very robust, like that's a robust sort of franchise that has blown up and expanded and is now kind of all over the place, right? Because of that hook was pretty easy to it was pretty easy to expand out from.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Do you have like a favorite fast food sandwich place? I guess would be the best way to put it. I don't want to say keep it to strictly sandwiches, right? Don't include hamburgers because that's like kind of
yeah. The fast food. What would we think? Do you know Jersey Mike's, right?
I'm familiar. Yeah, I would say you can go up
I'm
to fast casual without breaking the rules.
Yeah. God, fast casual makes it a lot tougher. So really, I want to see how big Ike Sandwiches is. Is it bigger than I thought, or is it just California? Okay, interesting. All right, so this is sort of all over the Southwest: California, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and Texas. Right, very typical Southwest states, but it's only 6. Right, it's only 6 states. It hasn't gone to the East Coast or whatever else. Under the circumstances that qualifies, right, as a relatively like big fast food chain, it would absolutely be Ike's Sandwiches. And it's not just because the cool thing about Ike's is that it recreated the Southwest chicken, right? But the reason that it was able to do that was because they have this incredibly expansive menu with just like a million different things on it. And part of that is that Ike's Sandwiches wants to make those kinds of weird off-the-cuff sandwiches. In almost the same way that like Bob's Burgers, like the Fox TV show, the thing that Bob loves in that show is making burgers with weird ingredients that actually work really well, right? Ike kind of does the same sort of thing, and one of the things that he ended up doing was combining bacon, Southwest Chipotle mayo, and chicken tenders and lettuce, onion, cheese, which you can just put on there, obviously, right? You put all that on a sandwich, and that's the Southwest chicken. But the only reason that I was able to do that was because they had a sandwich that is like that, and I could kind of tinker with it a little bit by modifying a couple of things, and adding in a couple of other things. Like I think the default version of the sandwich that I get, it's not that chipotle mayo, it's mustard. They put mustard on that, and I just swap the mustard for the mayo, and then I add the onions, and that's the but like that is the thing that has gotten me there, right? So I want to say, I want to give it to Ike's. If we're talking in a little bit more broader terms, though, I like almost all of these kind of sandwich shops, mostly because they all kind of fit a different niche. So for instance, I like Jersey Mike's because it's huge. You get one of those giant sandwiches. It's basically 2 meals in one, right? You eat half the sandwich now, save half of it for later. You know, you're spending whatever, $12, $15 on a sandwich, but it's effectively $7.50 for lunch today and lunch tomorrow, right? Like that kind of a thing. I even sort of like Subway, to be honest, just because they're fucking everywhere. There's like always a Subway within walking distance, and it's $5 or whatever. It's like $6.50 if you want to get like a drink and chips kind of thing, right? So just in terms of I want to spend as little money as possible, I'm definitely willing to go to, I'm definitely willing to go to Subway for that. There's a couple of other ones, that I'll get to, but almost always I go to those just as a a thing I haven't had in a while. Just to variety is the spice of life, right? Like Jimmy John's, for instance. I know a lot of people that go apeshit for Jimmy John's. Never really did it to that level for me. I think they make perfectly reasonable sandwiches, but most of the time I go to like a different sort of location. What are some of the other ones? I'm trying to think. What might other sort of sandwich shops be that
The things that come to mind. So I am not a fan of Subway. I think like Subway's just like a little too bad for me.
Sure.
But like I had people like rave to me about how good Potbelly was, and I thought it was just okay. Um, I like Panera. Although I don't go there very often. It's just kind of like a thing. Like it's a thing I have every once in a while.
Yeah, I don't like sandwiches at Panera. Uh
Interesting.
but I do like Panera just fine. I just go there and get other shit,
That's fair.
like soup or whatever.
Yeah, that's fair. What else is other kind of sandwich shops are there? Like
I'm interesting. People rave about Potbelly. I like Potbelly, but I don't know. There's this whole group of sandwich places. Do you know Which, for instance?
no.
Which is probably my favorite of these. But there's this whole group of sandwich places that the sandwich that I get the same thing at, right? Which is essentially um an Italian sub, but it's grilled with, lettuce, onion, mayo. Very basic, straightforward. That's it. And I like all of those sandwiches, and I like all of those sandwich places, but I kind of think that they are not great because that I taking an Italian sub and grilling it essentially, they put it it's whatever, it's a little thing, it's like the little roaster. I think that makes the sandwich better for those places, but it is because it is worse overall. It's because those, the essential process of kind of lightly frying that stuff masks the fact that I think those ingredients are not so great. When I am eating at a place that I really love, right, like Del Rey Deli, the paragon of sandwich places for me in Los Angeles, Del Rey Deli, the deli at Marina Del Rey, right? That place, I don't want to eat a hot sandwich. I want to eat a cold sandwich because the stuff that they get, like, is just so good that I don't want to ruin it by passing it under, heat lamps or whatever that makes. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because I want to give like this is like maybe a little too vague, but an ode to kind of like your local grocery store submarine sandwich, right? Like, and at various points in my life, it's been different places, right? Like
Mhm.
ShopRite. Right now, it's Market Basket. I have had sub sandwiches from Publix. Um, they always seem to be a cut above, kind of like your standard sandwich shop. Definitely two cuts above like Subway. Um, without being too expensive. Like it's usually a pretty good deal too, right? Like
Mhm.
it's in like the prepared food section of the supermarket, and I love it. Funnily enough, so like recently I visited on my way down to Reunion. I visited New Jersey, and there's a new like specialty Italian grocery store in Morris Plains called Uncle Giuseppe's.
God, Morris Plains.
Yeah.
I used to fucking hate the kids from Morris Plains because they're in the same school district as us, but they went to a different middle school, and we fucking hated those guys. We played them in like soccer and shit, and I wasn't even on the sports team, but just like that rivalry trickled its way down. And the funny thing is that we all went to the same high school. The Morristown High School does Morris Plains, Morris Township, Convent Station, and
Maplewood.
Morristown, right?
Okay, yeah.
But
yeah.
I dipped out. I dipped out in middle school because I went to Frelinghuysen middle
I
school, and so I never got the contact. You know, the contact hypothesis never happened to me. So I just always evaded Morris Plains.
Interesting, huh? The Morris Plains for me was like the train station that was slightly sooner to get off of than Dover, because like both were like both Morris Plains and the Dover train station were about equidistant from my house.
Mhm.
And it was just a matter of like, but the Morris Plains one was slightly, it was like 20 or 30 minutes like further up the line because of train. That's how
Yeah, because Dover's the end of the line on that. That is the Dover line, right?
I was technically there's a couple stops past it, but I've never seen a train go past it. It's like like an extension route or something.
Mhm.
But yes, yeah. Dover is the end of under the line there. But yeah, no, this Uncle Giuseppe's place, it was freaking great. If you're ever back in New Jersey and you need a place to like grab like they had like a really great like fried chicken cutlet, mozzarella, I think a little prosciutto and some like arugula on it. It was so good. Like an Italian piece of Italian rib, very good.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I kind of didn't think about grocery stores. So to be clear, are you talking about I go up to the deli counter at a grocery store, I say, "Hey, make me an Italian sandwich," and they make you an Italian sandwich, and you walk out the store with it, or are you talking about like near the checkout, there's like an Italian sub in shrink wrap, right? You just pick that up and walk out.
Okay, so more of the former, but I will caveat that usually those places also have the sandwiches that you can go up and ask for, but wrapped in deli paper, like the popular option is pre-made, so you can grab and go with it if you want.
Okay, yeah. Oh, interesting. I would agree with you up to deli paper. That's my cutoff. I think the ones that are in shrink wrap are garbage almost all the time.
I agree with
And
you.
I
Yeah.
I'll eat them
needs
sometimes.
to have been made fresh, like within
Yeah.
recent history. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I do think I agree with that. And I don't really think about it in those terms. I don't know that I've ever, I wonder, have I gone to grocery stores before? Like just for, I almost always feel like I'm doing that where it's like, oh, we have to go to the store tonight. Well, that's fine. We'll just pick up dinner there. And that is the thing that I pick up. Right. Or it could also be whatever, fried chicken out of their thingy, or it could be a million other things. Right.
Yeah, no, I think so. That's mostly the modality. The reason I think I have a focus on it is there's two reasons. One, I regularly make a trip between New Jersey and where I live in New Hampshire, and literally halfway is this grocery store in Newington, Connecticut called Stu Leonard's, which is like this weird, like semi bougie, like grocery store that has like animatronics. It's like very friendly. Like there's a button and like you'll see like an animatronic chicken flipping around. It's a weird place. But it's very unique. Has very good ice cream. But recently, when I've been stopping I stop pretty regularly to get the ice cream because the ice cream is like really good. It's like almost like a custard. But their prepared food has these subs, and I did this very recently. The other thing is that previously, when I was like a kid, when I used to go to football games, we would stop at the ShopRite on the way to the Meadowlands and get subs there and the tailgate in the parking lot. So it's got a lot of warm memories. But they were always very good subs, right? They were a good deal. There was a lot of food. And, and like you said, you could walk into the counter, you could get like an Italian and then tell them to put like sweet peppers on it and, and like, all the accoutrements you want. And it was great. So, I think the grocery store sub, because I know that the Publix gets a lot of attention and kind of like in the zeitgeist, right? Like the Publix chicken tender sandwiches are very good supposedly, and I from what I've had in Publix, it's been good. But I think that your grocery store submarine sandwich is typically very good, especially if you're doing like the kind of local thing, right? Like I don't want to like shame like with the Stop and Shop giant like that family of stores, but I just never have had a sandwich there, and I don't never thought together.
Yeah, that's interesting. Publix is different because Publix is in the South, right?
Yeah, Publix
Like
is the
that's where.
South, ShopRite's New Jersey, Market Basket's North, or New England.
Okay. Yeah, like around here it's Ralph's, right? You have
Yeah.
Ralph's, you have Vons. But then there's also stuff like Whole Foods, right? And I don't know that I've ever eaten a sandwich of that variety from Whole Foods. One of the things that I will sometimes get when we go to Whole Foods is what we call goop, which is just like Whole Foods like famously has like these huge bars of just like stuff, right? Pasta salad, potato, like chip curry chicken, just like
Yeah.
and you just take a bunch of that and you put it in one of those brown boxes and then they weigh the whole thing. It's not very cost effective, but we also don't go there all the time just because it's a little bit out of the, I don't know. I've never liked any of the ritzy places. I almost always want a more straightforward grocery store. But I sort of wonder, like if I were to go to Whole Foods and ask them to make me an Italian sub, how good it would be. Because really a lot of the time it is just on the ingredients for me, right? Like it is just, do they have quality ingredients they are working from? Yes, no, right? And my bet is that it would probably be yes. Another one is Bristol Farms, which is another like ritzy famous grocery store out here in southern California, right? Like, I live in Hawthorne, which is sort of in South Central, right? But just west of us is the beach, and there's all of these towns alongside the beach. There's El Segundo, which is a little bit middle class just because it's where the Chevron oil refinery is, and nobody wants to live next to the oil refinery. But then there's Manhattan Beach, which is like very ritzy. And there's like Bristol Farms there, and I would bet that if I was some millionaire's housewife, I would be going to Bristol Farms, and I think I would wager that those sandwiches would be very high quality.
See, this is interesting because like just thinking about it, I think like Wegmans would probably do a good sub, but I haven't had one from there. But for the Whole Foods point, I think it could be hit or miss just because I think like Wegmans, or not Wegmans, Whole Foods has very high quality food, but anything that's going to rely on that kind of like nitrate infused meat, which is like what an Italian sub is, right? It's like I feel like when you get like the Whole Foods version of that, it might be like a better for you thing, but I don't think it's going to taste as good. Like,
God, you are probably correct. I didn't really think in those terms, but I think that's absolutely right. I actually think they would probably get. I feel like if I'm doing a very classic Italian sandwich, right, like capicola, right, like prosciutto, I bet those are good. But I don't think that they're gonna have like a basic Italian sandwich that would work.
you know what I bet they do? Because I've seen this happen with other things too. Instead of using iceberg, they use something like butterleaf, which doesn't have enough crunch and has too much flavor for like what.
Oh
It wants
yeah,
to be
it's
on
a
the
big
sandwich.
yeah. I fucking hate romaine lettuce on a sandwich.
Yeah, I think it works for like a chicken Caesar, but yes, generally, you want like that iceberg, like no flavor, all crunch. The point is just to be like crunchy in the sandwich. That's it.
Yeah, it is just texture, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that for sure. God, that's actually like really interesting. I'm thinking a lot about this because like there is like a real craft to very well made hams, right? Something that my father really likes to do is buy, because he lives in the Ironbound district in Newark, which is traditionally Portuguese, but just Iberian in general. You can go to a deli there and you can buy a really crazy, like smoked, uh, essentially it's essentially prosciutto, but it's like the Spanish version of that, right? And he just leaves it on the counter. And anytime you just look for a snack, there's like a little knife there, and you just carve off a piece of it.
Is this the big leg that's like?
Yeah, it's the big leg, and then it's on a cutting board, but the
with,
cutting board
yeah.
has a special thing that you like clip the leg into. Nobody, if you're not watching the YouTube video, the hand gesture I'm making will not make sense, but that is the thing. And anytime when I was in college, anytime I went home, there was always one of those. Honestly, sometimes it was the same one of those because they last for fucking ever, right? The meat is so cured at that point, right, that it is impervious to anything. And I bet that if you took that and made a sandwich out of it at a Whole Foods, it would be spectacular. But if you wanted to get some, fucking salami, right? Some just straight up ham and salami on a sandwich, it would be garbage.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like I feel like getting like that's kind of Iberico ham, right? Something like that. Like,
Hmm.
I feel like that's probably a little too expensive for them to have at the deli, right? Like, I agree if you took that and made it into a sandwich, that would probably be very good. But I feel like that they're not gonna have the at the deli. They're gonna have like the organic salami, right? Which I tend to find is not great. Like it's because so much of the flavor profile of like your kind of like base cured meat is like Prague powder number 2, right? Like um that I find that the kind of like healthier Whole Foodsified version of them just don't hold up as well.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Iberico ham is hundreds of dollars, and it's not a big deal because it's not meant. You're
You
not
don't
meant
eat
to
that
make
on
a
a
sandwich
sandwich.
out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You are just meant to, take off little tiny chunks of it at a time. Um, so and it's also like maybe you're spending $500, but you're spending $500 and the thing lasts you a whole year.
Right.
So yeah, probably, yeah, that's probably how that works. Especially because I mean, it's almost always it's like 15 pounds. It's a lot of meat, right? On the thing. So I don't know what that would come out to, but um, if you get 15 pounds of $10 meat, that's $150, right? So
Yeah.
that's really not all that weird in terms of price, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's also probably like I'm pretty sure Iberica ham is like one of those things where like you could get like really high end stuff that's like thousands of dollars.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
sure.
So Lou asked in the chat, I think this was in reference to your point about like the warmed sub. Like, does that mean you're
Yeah.
anti-toasted bread? I think that's an interesting topic though. How do you feel about toasted bread for your sandwich? I think it's very sandwich specific. Like, I think a toasted bread is necessary for like a BLT. Like, I don't think it's good with like a soft piece of bread. On the other hand, I feel like there's sandwiches I wouldn't like. I feel like a peanut butter and jelly would be weird to be toasted.
Actually, okay, I will say a peanut butter and jelly with toast is fantastic, and I love it. I mean, it's funny we haven't talked about peanut butter and jelly
Yeah.
because we've agreed in the past that peanut butter and jelly is the archetypal sandwich, right? It is the most basic, straightforward sandwich anyone could ever make, right? But it hasn't come up at all.
Yeah, I feel like
am
that
I
also. I feel like that might also be like a very Amero-centric thing about peanut butter and
Yeah.
jelly, but whatever. Anyway, you were gonna say about toasted
Am
bread.
I anti-toasted bread? No. What I'm really describing in that situation is a kind of uncanny valley, which is to say that when I am getting the best possible sandwich that I want in a lot of situations, especially when I'm talking about these kind of meat-based sandwiches, almost always I want that sandwich cold, right? When I go to Del Rey Deli and I get at Del Rey Deli, it is called something. I think it's called the Capo, right? But it is their version of the Italian sub. Or I want that to be a cold sandwich with lettuce, onion, mayo, pepper jack cheese, and the deli meats that we would expect with that, which is typically some form of ham, some form of salami, kind of together, right? Like that is kind of the perfect ideal of that sandwich for me, right? What happens is as we go down the quality chain, there's a drastic drop in value of having a cold sandwich, and I would rather have the hot sandwich. So to put this in perspective, if I'm eating from like Which or whatever, getting a cold version of their Italian sub versus the kind of grilled version, the toasted version of that Italian sub, the toasted version is better. But that's because the quality of the ingredients has declined from the Del Rey Deli all the way at the top end, such that I just kind of wanna warm it up. I want the cheese to be melty. I want, the I want the salami to be a little bit like crispier and all that stuff. And then the toasted, like the bread is toasted as a part of that whole process.
I was say I think a big part there is that the bread is usually not great in the lower end sub chains, and toasting it makes it a lot better. I think I saw Sun Alton Brown once. It's like heating it up like expands the starch chains. And one, toasting it, I think make like the actual toasting of the surface of the bread makes it better. And two, like warming it up kind of like de-densifies and makes like what is like really not that great bread a little bit more palatable. So I think I agree with you there.
And I also think that there is a hard turn from kind of smush to crunch, I guess, in terms of mouthfeel,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, right? Where I the having a crispy, crunchy kind of sandwich is good for those kind of middle of the road sandwiches. And then all the way at the bottom end, you kind of have Subway, where I sort of think that everything is so dog shit that like you just might as well get it cold, because it's not gonna make a fucking difference if you get it hot, right? Like it's just and that's what I mean by when I say uncanny valley, right? Where it's sort of or it's almost like a bell curve thing, where the ends I want it cold, but in the middle I sort of quality wise I want it hot. But I want to be clear, that is specifically for these sorts of subs that I'm talking about. For BLTs, I would 100% agree. I would never eat a BLT except on, it doesn't have to be super toasted, but just like a little bit like a little bit of light a little bit of light toasting, or like a breakfast sandwich, right? I don't really want to eat a breakfast sandwich that hasn't been a little bit, like a little bit toasted. The common thing at delis when I grew up was you just put the bun, you just take the bun, you just put it on the grill for like 30 seconds, 45 seconds. It's not a lot. It doesn't toast the whole thing. It doesn't make it all crunch, but it just adds a little bit, right? And I think that that's kind of perfect for those sorts of things.
I would.
The one exception maybe to that is croissant. I don't want to toast a croissant most of the time because it deflates
Yeah.
the whole thing.
I think there's like some like it's tough to do, but I think you can get like a nice caramelization on the croissant. But like that's
Yeah.
that's tough to do, and it's also probably not like I think.
Yeah, I mean, I almost always never get it on a croissant. It's only when I have to. My preference is always bagel, roll, and then just kind of whatever,
Yeah, see,
like toast or.
I make for myself a lot of breakfast sandwiches, and typically I don't bother toasting. Like I use Martin potato rolls. Like they're one of my favorites, and they keep for forever too. So I can like buy a pack and not worry about them going off. But like I feel like the warmth from like I'll make like 2 scrambled eggs with like a piece of cheese and throw on a Martin's potato roll with like maybe a little bit of like horseradish mayo or something, and like that'll be like lunch. And I find that the heat um from the eggs and like kind of like the ambient like steam it's putting off is enough for me on the sandwich roll. But I see where you're coming from.
That's actually fair, and that maybe is true of BLTs. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I probably have had BLTs with non-toasted bread, but I think just the heat of the bacon, right? Like if I'm making it at the house, or like Rachel's making it at the house, just taking that, putting it on a piece of bread, probably masks that effect in my mind. I could also be wrong. I'm pretty sure she's left the chat by now, but if she was in the chat, she would probably tell me no, I toast it every time. But yeah.
I think you need to toast it because I think the sandwich doesn't stand up well unless you're using like maybe like a whole grain bread. Like
I mean, I think part of that is because the crunch to smush Rachy, or like chewy maybe is the other example of this, is a big concern, right? Which is I think part of why the breads at places like Subway or whatever are so bad. They tend to be very sort of chewy, mushy, whereas the Del Rey deli breads are much harder kind of rolls, right? That stand up and don't like deflate immediately like a balloon or something. And
the flip side of that is with Subway, when you heat it up, it doesn't necessarily like when you get the crunch out of it, it almost like turns into like this brittle like thing that almost dissolves, which is not great.
That's true.
Yeah. Sorry, you were going to say.
Well, and so the thing about bacon a lot of the time, especially the kinds of bacon that I like. First of all, we have an episode on bacon. Go listen to that if you want full thoughts here. But my thing about bacon is I think a lot of people overcook the bacon. They make this super crispy bacon that I hate that shit. You know what I mean? I want there to be some chew to the bacon, and that the chew on a crunchy bread is going to work a lot better than chewy bread and chewy bacon, right? Even if you have crunch in, a fresh tomato or iceberg lettuce or a raw onion like I like it, right? The like you really have to have a kind of solid piece of toasted bread to make that work, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
See, this is maybe true of every club sandwich. I feel like most club sandwiches I like eating have to have that toasted.
I think I agree with
bread.
you. Yeah. I think it's because like I think like because like anything with like a solid piece of meat in it is just going to distort the bread around it. Like sliced like cold cuts, right? Which is essentially what like a lot of like your standard kind of like ham and cheese are, right? they'll like separate fine. They won't like deform the bread. But if you've got like a piece of chicken or like a piece of bacon on a sandwich, and you try and like do the sandwich thing, the bread's gonna like kind of like tear around the piece of
Yep.
meat. Unless it's like maybe like I said, you could get away with like a 7 grain, right? Because it's got enough structure to it to work. But
Yeah, I mean, I think about something that I do. I don't like turkey as a rule, but if I'm ever doing turkey for Thanksgiving, like I'm at a friend's house or someone and there's leftovers involved. The thing I want to do with that turkey is I want to pull it off and put it on a piece of bread with some mayo. Just make it like a little turkey sandwich out of that thing. And I have had it happen a million times because I never toast that. But I should, right? Because the turkey is lumpy and incredibly weird, and you get these just malform abominations of a sandwich out of that. So it just kind of like defies that core structure that I think is necessary to kind of like make a sandwich, work or whatever.
I agree. Um, have you ever had one of the kind of like there's like a dozen versions of this, and everybody acts like it's the most unique thing in the world, but like basically Thanksgiving on a sandwich style sandwiches.
Like with stuffing? What is the
You
Thanksgiving on a sandwich?
usually so like the primary ingredients are usually turkey and then some cranberry sauce. Like those are like the two pretty constants, but usually there's stuffing. Usually there's you might get
Gross.
like a
This
mashed
sounds
potatoes,
awful. I hate
maybe
this.
some gravy. Um,
you know, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not a Thanksgiving guy. One of the things is that traditionally at my house, Thanksgiving was not made with turkey; it was made with a leg of lamb, right? So my dad makes this roast leg of lamb in the onion or in the oven. That was what Thanksgiving was like when I was like a kid growing up. So I don't have a lot of love for turkey in general. I've obviously eaten Thanksgiving in situations that aren't at my dad's house where he's making leg of lamb. But I just don't have that same kind of like cultural cachet for the turkey in general. And then I also don't like cranberry sauce and I also don't like gravy. So that just kind of sounds like a fucking nightmare. I mean, I guess I like stuffing and mashed potatoes. So maybe a version of that's stuffing and mashed potatoes is not
Interesting.
so bad.
Have you ever had like cranberry sauce, like real cranberry sauce? It's not like out like the jelly mold out of the tin.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there are people who like the jelly. I think Rachel actually really likes the jelly.
Yeah,
I just don't like either, really, all that
okay.
much. Which is weird. I like cranberry juice just fine. I told this story a couple of weeks ago about how um, Rachel got 100% super, like pure cranberry juice that you are meant to water down, but I did not realize that what that was. I just saw cranberry juice in the fridge and I pulled myself a giant glass of it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's so good." I drank the full glass like a dumbass or whatever. But I don't know. I have just never responded to cranberry sauce. I have never responded to um the gelatin kind of version all that well. This is which is also maybe a weird thing. We always had flan for Thanksgiving. That was like the family tradition because I don't know. Flan is
Well,
a
cra-
Spanish.
cranberry sauce is like a side dish at Thanksgiving, right? Like
Yeah.
so
Well,
it'd be like mint jelly, I guess, in your case, right? Like
yeah, I guess that's true. I always think of it as sort of like a dessert because
not.
you would think of as a fruit as a dessert, but the truth is I just don't eat it enough to think about it as anything in an accurate term, right?
So honestly, I think in the Thanksgiving, kind of, you get my full thoughts of this on our Thanksgiving episode. But like
Mhm.
I think in the kind of the whole Thanksgiving oeuvre, like it's like the one source of acidity on your plate. It's like at least the most consistent one, right? Because otherwise, it's like potatoes and stuffing and turkey and maybe onions and like everything is usually pretty rich, and like there's usually few and far between places where you can get like acid. Maybe somebody's made a side salad or something, but the cranberries are pretty consistently that tartness
Yeah,
to
that's interesting. Where do I get acid in our I feel like a lot of our Thanksgiving has these weird off color dishes just because like I don't know, but that's like the family that I grew up in. But I don't really know that there's another place for sort of acid in what we make.
something with bright flavors. Like, does the lamb get served with mint jelly? Because that would be like a place for it.
No, though it is definitely also the point of that lamb is to be uh Very God, I should like have my dad on for an episode. Chat, let me know if I should convince my dad to come on to an episode of our food podcast to talk about his like leg of lamb. The point is to create this kind of crust to it, which
Okay.
is almost like I don't want to call it a marinade. It's not a marinade, right? But it is just, you put um stuff on the outside of it so that it creates this it kind of creates this crust, and that crust itself has a lot of flavor, and then the lamb itself has a lot of flavor because lamb is a very like rich, flavorful kind of meat, which is really the opposite of turkey. This is the thing I don't like about turkey, is that it is kind of flavorless in general, and you need all this other stuff. This is why people like gravy, right? Because you put the gravy on the white meat, and it makes the white meat not dry and gross, right? But to me, I just want to eat a meat that is not dry and gross, which is what the roast, like leg of lamb,
No, I generally agree with
is
you.
like.
The 1 year I spent Thanksgiving away from my family, I made myself that wasn't quite a Chateaubriand, but it was like a roast in that style. Very similar, right? Like building a good. I think like if you were making a brisket, you'd call it the bark on the outside. I don't think they use
Mhm.
that term for like the roast that we're talking about, but like similar
Yeah,
type of
but
thing.
it is like very similar to that, right? It's I don't know. It's complicated. The recipe that he uses, I know, is traditionally Moroccan,
Ooh.
which is, I don't know. My dad worked in restaurants for years, which is part of where all this like weird shit comes from. But so yeah.
Yeah, well, we've blown past our normal hour by a lot, but last 2 minutes, what have you been eating this week?
What have I been eating this week? Honestly, talking about sandwiches, a big discovery of mine, is my very classic, uh, ham and cheese sandwiches. Right? I used to talk about these way in the beginning of the podcast because I ate them at Square Enix all the time, which was just, pieces of like deli ham or whatever. But I'm not a Swiss cheese guy. I'm a pepper jack cheese guy. Um, so it's pepper jack cheese with that. And what I used to do was I would toast the whole thing, right? I would you put the cheese, so it is, so specifically the two pieces of bread, you put a tiny bit of mayonnaise on both sides. This is another interesting thing that we can maybe talk about. You put just like a very thin layer of mayonnaise on both sides. Then one side is the cheese side, one side is the ham side. You put both of those open faced into like a toaster oven or the oven or whatever, and you just leave them in there. And I do this all by eyeball. I'm just watching the cheese melt because it needs to be melty but not like dripping into anything else, right? And then you take it out, smush the whole thing together, cut it in a triangle. That is the classic Buddy Salah, ham and cheese sandwich experience. And I have been rediscovering that in recent times, just as a cheap, kind of straightforward and convenient sort of lunch food, I guess. And part of it is that the ham that we've been getting has been really high quality. Specifically for this is it's not like prosciutto, it's not capicola, right? It is just straight up whatever you like, Black Forest ham or whatever. But the thing that makes the difference for me is that the guy, and I swear to God, it is one guy at like the Ralph's that we go to, because I have had packets that are not like this. They have a bunch of packets that is just like a half pound, three quarters of a pound, and it's just like in front of the deli counter, and it's just when these guys get a minute, they slice out a bunch of like of these packets, and you just go pick up a packet rather than tell them to do the slices like in general. But the guy makes these really thick slices that are fantastic, and I love them. So that has been like the animating thing in my food life recently. So yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm sure if you went to the counter and like give me a half pound of ham sliced thick, they'd do that for you, right? Like,
Yeah, and it just so happened that one day we were at the grocery store, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna pick up this, right? And it's kind of just like taken over my specific, like my like lunch life, right?
fair,
As a just, what is the thing that I'm gonna make in 30 minutes while I'm doing another thing for lunch or whatever.
fair enough.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, for me, I've been like I said, I went down to Baltimore and stopped at Jersey in between. So besides the chaps, um, I don't know how often you went, but I checked out one of my old haunts, which is Tambers. which
Oh my god, I used to go to Tampers all the time.
so did I. And something I realized about Tambers is one like is Tambers really ruined me on casual Indian food because I think to this day it's probably the best casual Indian place I've ever been to. And it was probably the first casual Indian place I was ever been to. And every time I go someplace else, I'm like, this is not as good as Tampers. Like, and I always thought like, my thing was always like, to friends of the cast, Monogram, I always wanted to like get like a real version of this, but like they loved it, and there was a reason they loved it is because it was like the best, that like a very high quality casual Indian place. Also had like interesting normal diner food, which is always like weird. It's like either you're getting Indian or you're getting like I very occasionally got like a cloak and dagger, which is like basically like a Reuben but with coleslaw instead of sauerkraut, which I loved. But yeah, no, Tambers was great. I also went back to Charles Village Pub (CVP), which got a facelift.
Wow.
Uh,
Did it really? I fucking hated that place.
it was a good place to get drinks at, which but he does not drink, so it's not
Fair
a thing.
enough, yeah.
Yeah. And also on Mondays they had half price apps, which was like when I was being a stupid college student, it'd be like Monday night, like 6 baskets of jalapeno poppers and mozzarella sticks, and like like a half dozen drinks was like a great Monday night. I also went to Paper Moon. Did you ever go to Paper Moon?
Yeah, I went to Paper Moon. Paper Moon. So Tambers was the very default place. Whenever parents came down, we always went to Tambers because it was kind of too expensive to ever go like normally, right? You never really want to spend that much to go to Tambers in a normal kind of context. But you could convince your parents to go there. They pay for the meal, and you kind of like, yes, I got Tambers. But Paper Moon is if there were parents with a car, you go to Paper Moon because it's pretty close, but like you can't easily walk there. It's not just like right across the street like Tambers was. Um, yeah, I've been to Paper Moon many times. I think Paper Moon is overrated, to be honest, but it's fine. It's
I think I think
it's fine.
I think it's good for what it is. Plus, it's got like a part of it's the ambiance, right? Like it's like a weird. It actually reminds me a
Yeah.
lot of like some like it reminds me of like an old style diner like that's up here, except that it's remixed to be weird instead of like being like
Yep.
like I've been in the normal version of that diner a number of times. Um, Interestingly, this was like it was a lot closer to campus than I remember, and maybe I was just like lazy in college. But like it's right off the south end of campus. Also, maybe it was because like the reunion activities centered around like the Decker Quad, right? Which is like
Mhm.
right there. Like that's really right there. But like I was like I remembered it being a little bit far away, and then so I took an Uber there from my hotel, and it's like this is like not like we walked to campus afterwards, right? And like did our reunion stuff. So
Yeah, I think it's at like 28th Street, and obviously that central that's 33, right? So five
yeah,
blocks down, maybe 2 or 3 blocks east. That's really not that bad. But
yeah,
it's just like nobody ever goes that way, right? I
yeah,
used
yeah.
to go that way because there was a comic book shop over in Hamden that I used to go to, and so sometimes I would just just passing by, walking into
In
Hamden, you would see it. But
in the
uh,
rotunda.
yeah. So
Inter-
I
did
was
you play
in.
Magic there ever? We used to like me and Monik used to play Magic in the rotunda. With that,
Yeah, well, the F&Ms, right? Yeah,
yeah,
it
yeah.
was the same size. It
But
was
Saturday
that. Yeah,
morning
it was.
was we did, but yeah,
Yeah, so oh, interesting. I did go to a couple F&Ms, but we played Commander. This was
okay.
before it was even called Commander. This is how I got into Commander,
It was
which was then
EDH. Yeah,
EDH, right?
yeah.
We would sometimes go, and during the F&Ms, we would play Commander games off to the side with people that were done, or between matches, whatever, like whatever that looked like. But obviously my you know uh that was on Friday nights. F&M is Friday Night Magic, so yeah.
Yeah,
But
we
but
did
I
it
was
Saturday
living
morning.
in the God, what was that called? It was the one campus housing. I was the RA all the
Draw.
way at the bottom.
Oh, Homewood.
Oh, was that called Homewood? Maybe. I honestly
Because
can't
I
remember
remember you
the
being
name.
in Charles Street Commons, but that was like in the middle of campus.
Yeah, I was in Charles Street Commons for 1 year, but then I was all the way down in Homewood, I guess, for another, if
I think
that's
it
the
was
name of the
Homewood.
place. I can't remember. Um, and that is if I want to go to the rotunda, I can either go up and over, right? Or I can just go straight across. And if you just go straight across, you pass right by Paper Moon because you're
I
going
see.
on that like 30, 28, whatever street sort of parallel, kind of going like left to right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, on Tambers, by the way, I do want to mention Tambers is the shit, and it is also the shit because the Indian food is so fucking good. The thing about Tambers is people never like you can always tell that there are people who just sort of see it as the diner that it presents on its face. But from my experience, Tambers is effectively just an Indian place, right? I don't think I ever went to Tambers and got anything but Indian food there because I just thought like it
The
was so
diner
good.
food was good too. Like, so I don't know. Perhaps I was willing to spend a little bit more than you, but I went to Tambers a lot. And maybe I also went with friends and we did like family style stuff. So maybe that also mitigated costs a little bit. But like occasionally we'd go there and be like, I feel like something different. I don't feel like having another CTM or chicken tikka masala. So I'd get like a piece of diner food. It was still great, right? Like they made really good food. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, fair enough. I'm sure it was great. I just that was not the not the world that I was like I was living in, I guess.
Right. Like I feel like it was weird to go to Tambers for like the diner food. But like it was one of those things where like I ended up going enough. It's like maybe I should pay attention to like the other half of this menu occasionally. It was like diner presentation, like very classic Americana diner presentation.
With the booths and everything,
In a way, I didn't quite appreciate because I was coming from New Jersey, like the land of 1,000 diners, right? Which you don't actually find that often in other places, right? Like diner cultures, and Baltimore isn't that far from New Jersey, so it's you got some overflow down there, but like, it was something special that I don't think I appreciated enough while I was there. So.
No, I get that for real. There are not a lot of diners out here like near me. There is one in walking distance that makes great burgers, and I love it, called Mandy's. And it is maybe the only other diner I can think of besides like a famous diner like up on the Sunset Boulevard that's been around since the 50s and has all these like actors and stuff on the wall. There's a couple of like delis and stuff. Obviously, there's there's a pretty big Jewish population in Los Angeles, and so delis like Cantor's at Fairfax, for instance, are essentially diners in our kind of traditional New Jersey sense, but not in the but it's very much in like the Jewish sense, not in the Greek sense, right? Like a lot of the diners I think of are owned by Greek guys, and the best thing on the menu is the gyros, right? Maybe not the best thing on the menu, but like just like
owned by Greek guys, like serving an Italian audience. So they've got like 72 pages of the menu. Some of them are Greek, some of them are Italian, some of them are like classic diner food. Yeah, that's like yeah. Sorry.
And honestly, my favorite thing about those diners is I felt like I could order anything and it was great, right? Like I never lived in a world where normally I just kind of settle on what my favorite thing is at a place and I eat that all the time, right? Like chicken tikka masala, for instance, right? Like I just think, oh, this is the best thing on this menu. 90% of the time I'm gonna get chicken tikka masala. Maybe I'll spice it up every once in a while, right? With diners, it was very rarely like that. If I go to a diner, I'm sometimes getting chicken Caesar salad. I'm sometimes getting a burger. I'm sometimes getting a club sandwich. I'm sometimes getting, like a chicken parm. Yeah, exactly. It could be fucking anything. It feels like, because there's just like literally everything on the
menu. A long time ago, I took friend of the cast Mark to a diner in my hometown, and he just like started flipping. He's like, "Why are there so many things here?"
Yeah, I mean, seriously, especially if they serve breakfast all day, because that there's sometimes that hard cutoff, that 11 a.m. cutoff, when you're just like, all right, we're done with breakfast stuff. But yeah,
no, Randolph Diner from my hometown, breakfast all day. Also like burgers, also Greek food, also Italian food, or like that the whole gamut. Plus, like, are you familiar with? You must be familiar with disco fries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm convinced disco fries is some Canadian businessman was traveling in like the New York area and was like, I need poutine. What's the best you can give me? And they put like they use mozzarella instead of cheese curds. And it's basically it's basically like poutine with mozzarella instead of cheese curds.
Yeah, I am also down on disco fries because one of the pieces of disco fries is gravy, and obviously I've expressed my lack of love for gravy. But honestly, you put cheese on some fries, it's gonna be tasty, right? So
All right. Well, we're over time. Do you want to wrap this up? Are we good to wrap it up?
God, do I want to wrap this up? I
Do you
guess
want
I
to
guess
sandwich this up?
yeah, is this podcast a sandwich? I'm one kind of bread, you're the other kind of bread. The conversation is the main line.
Juicy content.
Oh god. Yeah, I have nothing else I have nothing else to say here, right? Like
Well,
sandwiches are good.
yeah.
It's funny. We did not talk enough about peanut butter and jelly, but I don't know what is there to say about peanut butter and jelly. It is like the basic core American sandwich. I eat it probably more than any other sandwich because it's so straightforward, right? A little sweet, a little savory, on a sandwich. There's carbs in it. It's like lunch food. Who cares?
I feel like if we really wanted to, we could probably do a whole episode on it. It would be like really in the dirt, right? Like, about like what kind of peanut butter, what kind of jelly,
Yeah.
like those Schmuckers like pouches of like bread.
The little thing where it's like a little squeezy tube that is both peanut butter and jelly in the same thing,
Oh,
and you just squeeze it out.
So what I'm thinking of is they have these like prepackaged. They were peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but they were like almost like pita pockets. It was like white bread with like the crust cut off, but like the bread was like pinched together on the edges, almost like a peanut butter and jelly white bread ravioli.
What the fuck?
Let me see if I can find this.
I understand exactly what you're. Oh, holy shit! I think I remember. Are these called Uncrustables?
That might be it.
Oh my god! I don't know why.
Yeah, that's
but,
exactly.
Oh
correct.
my god! This
That's
is exactly it. It is a fucking peanut butter and jelly ravioli. I have never in my life had one of these, but they look awful, and I don't want them.
I mean, they are exactly what they look like, right? They're for what they are. They're fine, right? Like if I had to choose between this and like like a hot pocket to give to my child, I'd probably pick the Uncrustable.
Fair enough. That's true.
But,
Can I just ask? I did have one more question that I didn't bring up. So my dad and I famously differ on this. My dad, whenever he's making a sandwich, he is a lots of mayo on one side of the sandwich, right? So it's essentially the same amount of mayo, right? But you just take it and you put it on one side of the bread, and however goopy or whatever it is, you just kind of like leave it there. And my thing is I want an even thin coat on both pieces of bread. How do you approach your mayonnaise?
That it depends on some factors, but I think generally I'm not putting enough in the sandwiches I typically make. I'm not putting enough mayo on the sandwich to warrant both sides. But I think I would do both sides if I was putting a large amount of mayonnaise on a sandwich. And I also I dope the bun. I don't put it up, which is my understanding is the correct term is like you spread it on the bun instead of on the meat. I guess like there's some condiments that I will squeeze out onto the meat if it's like in a bottle, but
I am almost always doping the bun, as they say. So
yeah. I do make my own mayonnaise though, which I think is worth the effort.
Fair enough. Jeez, I don't do that. Fuck.
I mean, it's really simple. Like it's so it's really simple if you have an immersion blender. And and you can get a cheap one and it'll work fine. But it's like 2 eggs, some Dijon mustard, and like whatever flavorings you want. I usually use salt, a little bit of vinegar, and then you get like 2 cups of oil, and you turn on the immersion blender and you slowly pour the oil in, and it forms the emulsion. And it's funny because the more oil you add, the thicker it gets. So you just stop when it's as thick as you want. But yeah, I think it's highly worth doing. So also the reason. This is a thing that I think is a really good. So I don't fry things super often, but when you strain off the fry oil, if you've I made fried I want to say fried shallots once. Fried zucchini for a different dish. I strained off the oil and I turned that oil into mayonnaise, and the zucchini flavor was imparted into mayonnaise. It was fantastic.
Oh my god, that actually sounds fantastic. That sounds really good.
Yeah. So
holy shit.
Yeah, you just have to strain the oil to get like all the fry bits out. So, yeah. But yeah, so that's I guess our show. If you'd like to reach us, or if you'd like to follow us, you can watch or these episodes go out live on twitch.tv/games. You can follow us on twitch.tv or on YouTube, on SoundCloud. I'm a little out of practice. Obviously, we've been off for a couple weeks, so pardon me. we've got all the places to follow. See all the links in the description. If you want to watch this again, it'll be on YouTube. The recording will be on SoundCloud soon. That's everything I have. Buddy, you have anything you want to promote?
I have nothing that I'm looking to promote.
Yeah, we should be back on regular schedule for next week. Our apologies
Yeah.
for being delayed. But yeah. Well, with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.